Last year, when most investors were watching their stocks plummet, one Wall Street legend had an unfair advantage that was identifying winning stocks with massive upside, like Riot Blockchain before it shot up 10,000%, Digital Turbine before it shot up 789%, and Overstock before it shot up over 1,000%. This power gauge comes from the legendary Mark Chaikin. And right now you can get a free in-depth look at how his power gauge system works. A way to type in any of the 4,000 different tickers and see exactly where the stock is most likely to go next and in any type of market. Simply go to powergaugetrial.com for your free look. Again, that's powergaugetrial.com for your free look. All right, let's get to our segment today. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to Stansberry Research. We are talking Bitcoin today, pushing above $47,000, turning positive for 2022 after a slew of bullish developments for the cryptocurrency. Here to talk about this and so much more is Gareth Soloway. He is the president and CFO over at inthemoneystocks.com and verifiedinvestingcrypto.com. Gareth, always good to see you. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me back. I'm excited because there's so much to talk about today.
There is so much to talk about. I know you've brought all your charts. I have a lot of questions for you today. But first, let's start with Bitcoin. Now, we saw the slew of bullish developments unfold here for the cryptocurrency. I could almost sum it up by saying a splash of capital for the crypto. Goldman Sachs last week became the first major U.S. bank to trade Bitcoin over the counter. Ray Dalio's Bridgewater has also said it's about to make an investment into a crypto fund. So all these positive news items are really helping the crypto here, right, Gareth?
Yeah, they've definitely given it a nice little push to the upside. What I'm focusing on here is that if you look at the NASDAQ, right, the NASDAQ has had a huge move to the upside. In fact, I can quickly show the NASDAQ 100 chart. So you've had this big risk on trade coming back ever since the Fed raised 25 basis points. And then crypto is kind of following suit here. So while there's positive developments in crypto, I would say in general, it's behaving just like it should. It's following the tech sector as it did to the downside, or in fact, you could argue that it led to the downside. My major concern here is the chart. The chart to me is actually coming into significant resistance. You can see here it's had multiple up days in a row, about 7 up days in a row. This is the upper range. If you connect this high right here, let me zoom in a little bit there to this high. Notice how that trend line is right above here, and then that's the 200 moving average. So for me, if Bitcoin is really about to break out here, it needs to get over this area. This would be the big area. This is the one you want to follow as a technician. Otherwise, technically, you're still stuck in this same sideways channel that we've been in since January. So, it's a great move, but I'm not seeing the meat and potatoes yet, if you will, of the breakout yet. I know there's a lot of bullish sentiment out there. That's a little concerning because everyone's jumping back on the bandwagon. And just like when we were at 68,000, that was the same way it was, and we know what happened. So let's watch and see what happens over the next few days.
Okay, so 48,250, the true test. Is that the level?
Yeah, I would want to see price get above that level and hold there for at least a couple days, not just peak above where it fools people, but actually hold there. Then we start talking about, all right, now this could be a legitimate break to the upside.
Okay, that's the meat and potatoes you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Gareth, because the last time you were on the show, you were talking about how Bitcoin, you wouldn't be surprised if it were to retest 20,000, quite bearish. Longer term, you've said, look, I'm bullish, but short term bearish. Have the recent events, we spoke before really the black swan event of Russia, Ukraine. So have the recent events changed your perspective on things? Has your stance on Bitcoin's price changed now?
No, it hasn't. And I'll tell you this, is that basically all of these things like Ray Dalio, Goldman Sachs, even the invasion of Ukraine, which pushed oligarchs to arguably move into Bitcoin to avoid sanctions, those are all unbelievably bullish things for the longer term. But what concerns me, number one, is the bear flag that you can see in front of you on the chart. And that tells us that there's likely further downside. And the second thing is, with the Fed raising rates and arguably talking more actively about 50 basis points multiple times this year, you likely will see continued deleveraging in the system. So the NASDAQ, yes, it's had a great bounce. I don't think it lasts. And if the NASDAQ starts to fall and fear comes back in, then you have to say Bitcoin likely will go lower. So again, longer term, those are all positives. In the short term, fear and greed really rule. Right now, you're getting a little bit on the greed side. And ultimately, I think fear takes over and takes us lower.
So again, interesting levels. You said there's excitement, there's bullishness. If, perhaps an investor is watching here saying, I got to get in, I got to get in.
Yeah.
What would you do here?
Yeah, so right here, this is not the point to be getting in. I would much rather give people, like if you hold above this 200 moving average for a couple days, I would feel much safer about getting long at that point. And just in full fair disclosure, I've been shorting, as of yesterday, I've started to inch in on the short side of Bitcoin with my members at verifiedinvestingcrypto.com, and we will likely add again, and we're doing very small amounts, like 2.5% of portfolio. So it's very small at this point, but we're definitely looking for a pullback off the 200 moving average. And then ultimately, I do think it breaks to the downside in the next couple months when the NASDAQ and tech sector starts to reverse down to the downside. So if you're looking for the bull case, you need it to get above the 200 moving average, so 48,250, and it's got to hold there for a couple days to secure itself. Otherwise, you're right into resistance here. You never want to be the person buying right into resistance.
Okay, so you first want to see what happens, but overall, you still think we're going to have that serious correction or crash back down to 20,000.
I really do. I mean, at this point, you can't tell me that the flush out we've seen, it hasn't, none of the alts have gone out of existence and there's 15,000 cryptos. You've got to see some sort of flush out in the system. I mean, even in 2017, you had some going to zero. You got to see, there's so many more today. You've got to see more of that. The Fed is tightening. They're telling you that they're going to tighten and they're going to tighten aggressively. That is negative for risk assets. Bitcoin falls into a risk asset right now.
Right. And we haven't seen Bitcoin really tested in a higher interest rate environment. So it will be fascinating to see how this plays out. Okay, I don't want to spend too much more time on Bitcoin because we have a lot more charts to cover. So with your blessing, if we could move on to Ethereum, let's look at what's happening on the Ethereum front here and your latest forecast.
Yeah, so Ethereum, this is an amazing orange trend line right here. You can see it held. It's held the whole way. That's the one you worry about if it ever breaks to the downside. As long as we're trading above that line, then you could argue that you're staying in this range. You can see we're right into this little trend line here, and the 200 moving average is right above that. So the same thing applies as what we just discussed on Bitcoin, where you don't want to be buying right into this area. You'd much prefer if it can stay above for a little while. Otherwise, look for a pullback and then buy the pullback. And again, basically this trade setup is a very simple trade setup. Like let's just say you pull back to this area right here, right around 3,000 would be support. Yep. If you buy there, you have upside back to here and your downside is here. Now, if you got below this level, this trend line, then you just stop out of the trade. So again, this is a trader's mentality where you understand the levels, support and resistance. As long as you hold support, you can buy and hold. If you break support, you have to be ready to act, because that would be my fear, is that if that line breaks, then Bitcoin support is breaking and likely you're heading to 20,000 on Bitcoin. If Ethereum breaks, it's probably heading to 1,700 or so.
Oof, okay. On the note of Ethereum, let's talk about the two biggest competitors to Ethereum, Solana and Terra Luna. Let's start with Terra Luna. There's a lot of buzz for Terra Luna, flipping from an algorithm stablecoin to a Bitcoin-backed or even partially Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. People are saying could be a game changer. So let's look at what's happening on this front here.
Yeah, so this one right now, there's a couple positives and negatives. Number one, the positive is it's still trading near its all-time highs, just slightly off. So compare it to Bitcoin or compare it to a lot of the other altcoins, it's held up beautifully well. The negative here is that Bitcoin has just gone on a massive run and Terra Luna hasn't really done anything. So that's a little, I'm like, oh, okay, let me think about this one here. Why isn't it making a big move? Yep. Why isn't it taking out the all-time highs up here? And that would be something that would give me a little bit of a pause. So again, short term, there's a little bit of a trend line just here that I'm watching. And again, if we break below, you're probably headed back to that 200 moving average. If you can get above this line, then I think you retest and maybe break out. But certainly in terms of an investor, it concerns me that it's not behaving like the other cryptocurrencies right now. That would give me a little bit of pause to maybe stay on the sidelines.
If we could pull up Solana now, the other competitor to Ethereum, is it undervalued by investors?
Well, So it certainly shows that it has more legs potentially. Like of all the charts here, I mean, it has had a big run off of this support line, but at least the 200 moving average is all the way up at $150 right now. So it has some distance to go. You're going to have resistance at 120. It needs to get through that. But if it can get through 120, then you really don't have much in terms of resistance until you get up to that 150 level. So it's had an amazing move. I mean, it's gone from $80 or sub 80 all the way back to 110. But in terms of support and resistance, this one still looks reasonable, especially if it can get through 120. So it might have some legs here.
Okay, if I could get one more in here, let's go with BNB, Binance Coin.
Yeah. BNB is a nice one too. So what's interesting about BNB here is I still think there's more upside on BNB. You are right into this little resistance area, which I would consider to be minor resistance right here from this previous pivot.
Yep.
But this is likely where the chart wants to go. So you see the 200 moving average is around 475. This blue trend line, which would be a retrace to this upsloping line, is right underneath 500. So that's your short-term target on BNB. And again, that means that you probably have another $50 upside in BNB before it runs into major resistance. So the chart's not too bad on this one. It is a little more extended than I like. But again, if you're still kind of in this trade and you're kind of holding, maybe keep a trailing stop on it and then let it run maybe up to that 475, 480 level.
Okay, so you like this chart. Are there any other coins that you think have potential or charts that you're liking right now that we should mention?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I like MATIC. Let me take a look at that one. See, this one's right into resistance. So
Yep.
I'm just going through a couple of these that I kind of track, and this one's right into resistance. So certainly I wouldn't be buying this, just like Bitcoin's into resistance. So I think at this point, the cryptos have made this massive run. It would be
Yep.
helpful to see consolidation at this point, and then maybe you get another leg up. But watch that Bitcoin chart. The Bitcoin chart remains the one that's going to basically the dog that's wagging its tail, right? And this is the line to
Gotcha.
watch. So for me, I'm only looking at shorts until we get a pullback or unless Bitcoin establishes itself above this level.
Okay, let's pivot here and look at gold, because that was your asset pick for 2022. Last time we spoke, you said the charts were looking really good, beautiful. Now as you know, we went above $2,000 an ounce. Investors rejoiced. We've come back down since. The question is, what's it going to take to get above 2,000 and hold that or move higher?
Yeah, so I mean, gold was absolutely remarkable mover there. It broke out, which is the first stage of the next big move that I'm seeing. I'm kind of in the camp right now where I think there's a little bit more downside to it in the near term. Maybe a retrace to this little pivot, which is right around 1875, 1870 per ounce. But once you get there, I think the next leg starts to the upside. And this is very common, by the way. If you look at the high from 2020 and draw a trend line right there, you can see this was a classic double top. It's resistance. Price is expected to pull back off of that, and that's exactly what it does. But having said that, you have a longer term break here. So any pullbacks in this range are buying opportunities. And my guess is in the next 2 to 3 months, we take out this high and we start running towards 2,200, 2,300, maybe even $2,400 an ounce by third or fourth quarter of this year.
So are you suggesting that because we spoke before the interest rate hikes were announced, especially 50 basis points coming in May. So was this already baked into the equation then? Would gold not turn bearish on that news?
Yeah, so I don't view that because rate hikes historically over the last 20 years have caused gold to sell off, but we've been in an interest rate where we've been in an inflationary environment of 2% or less. Now we're in an inflationary environment of 10%-ish, right? So now that changes the whole equation. I think the high oil prices we've seen recently, the cost of wheat and other commodities are only going to fuel inflation, which means, yes, the Fed has to act more aggressively, but high inflation continues to benefit gold. So the longer inflation stays up, the better it is for gold. And I think that's the narrative that's going to take this a lot higher.
Obviously, with the sanctions in Russia, there's a lot of buzz around certain metals that Russia produces, ones especially needed in electrical vehicles, and EVs. Are there certain metals that you're looking at now that you think could really break out?
Yeah, I mean, I really do like the chart of silver right now. It still needs to consolidate a little bit longer, but same thing on silver. You've had this breakout above this trend line here. It's consolidating. I'm looking to buy around $24 an ounce. I think we will get a push down there. And then I think the next move up is all the way back to the $30 high up here. So I think silver's an interesting one.
Oh,
I
okay.
think on the right scenario, something like palladium here. Let me bring up that chart. Palladium's had a big pullback. I think now, in fact, today's level looks very attractive for palladium. Look at this little support area right there. That's really, really good support here at
Yeah.
2200. So that would be one. I love charts that had these big pops and now they've come all the way back in, because it's kind of like, you didn't chase it, so you should pat yourself on the back for that. But at the same time, you're able to buy it again at a level that was pre-invasion, before that massive move. With all the inflation out there, I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think it's interesting, just going back to silver for a second. So you buy silver at 24.
Yeah. Yeah, at this point, I would, because of the breakout. So basically, the charts rule everything I do. So I have to acknowledge that you had a break point right here. And so any pullback into this kind of retrace trend line area, this is now going to be support. So
Yep.
initially, when you go up into it, it's resistance. Once resistance is broken, it now becomes support. So the chart then dictates that I have to buy that, or I should buy that support when it comes back into play.
Okay, if I can pivot with you once again here, Garrett, just I want to bring up Tesla. We spoke about Tesla last time, obviously in the news today, because Elon Musk saying he wants to split the stock to be able to pay a dividend. Market reacting positively to the news. Let's look at what you think is in store for Tesla here.
Yeah, so I mean, just looking at the daily chart, it looks very similar to Bitcoin or some of these other ones that have had monstrous moves. I think that for the most part, announcements like this are somewhat kind of this, engineering of fake moves in the stock price to get the stock price up. I think it's possible Elon Musk is looking and saying, I know there's a lot of people shorting Tesla, and I'm going to try to put the pedal to the metal on them. I don't look at it as being a long-term reason the stock stays up. So again, yes, in the near term, we remember back in 2020 when they announced that last split, the stock had an incredible, incredible run, but we were in a different time period, right? We were in a printing money period. We were in the COVID kind of relief and checks going out to Americans from the US government. Now you're in a much different situation. So I think you have a lot of investors that are running back in. The Wall Street Bets crowd is kind of back in here. I don't think it lasts or goes and takes out the all-time highs. Just to show you one thing here, did you guys see AMC? I mean,
Yep.
all of the same stocks that ran during that Wall Street Bets phase are all running. GameStop. I mean, look at these moves, incredible to the upside. But what this tells me is that the Wall Street Bets crowd, the smaller investors, they're trying to kind of recreate the magic from 2020 and 2021. I'm skeptical, considering the Fed is just clearly telling you, hey, we're going to raise interest rates. That's going to suck money out of the system. How do you get the same sort of bang for your buck? I don't think it happens.
Well said, Gareth. I think we just covered a lot of ground. I guess if we could just wrap things up, we got your thoughts on the Nasdaq, but if we could look at the S&P, just get your views generally on where you think the market is headed here.
Yeah, so we are seeing a small down day today, nothing major, but the markets have just staged this remarkable rally. I look at this as like a kind of a bull trap, if you will, meaning that the markets are surging. I'm not necessarily 100% sure what the exact reasons are here. I don't know if it's a wall of worry with the invasion. Maybe there's hope that it comes to a close. Maybe there's hope that the global economy slows so the Fed doesn't have to hike as much. But the bottom line is interest rates going up. Remember the big saying back in basically for the last 10 to 12 years, don't fight the Fed, when the Fed was printing money and the markets just kept going higher. Now the Fed is doing the opposite. So the mantra that I keep repeating in my mind is don't fight the Fed here, and in fact start looking to short big rallies like this. So I'm shorting the S&P, I'm shorting the Nasdaq, I'm even shorting a little bit of Tesla up here, looking for pullbacks over the next couple weeks to couple months.
I mean, it's really interesting you say that, and I think only time will tell what will happen here, because the question is, will the Fed be able to successfully orchestrate this soft landing they're trying to do? Like, are they going to be able to fight inflation, raise rates just enough where they don't implode the market and are able to bring inflation down? Do you think they'll be
I
successful?
don't. I don't. If you look historically at the Fed, they're very bad at soft landings. So my guess is they're going to raise rates aggressively here. It's going to hurt the economy. High oil prices are hurting the economy. High food costs are hurting the economy. You're going to see the economy slow very rapidly in the second half of the year, and then the Fed is going to stop hiking. Now, most people would say, oh, okay, isn't that really good for risk assets? Well, the problem is it would be good if they could print the same amount of money they did last time, but they can't. they can't do it because inflation is still way too high. So they're going to be in a box here where the
Right.
economy's slowing, but they can't stimulate the economy like they used to. That's bad for stocks because a slowing economy without stimulus means that consumers will be buying less, which means earnings will come down substantially, or growth at least of earnings will drop.
Gareth, if I could just bug you
Yeah,
with
of
one
course.
last chart, you just made me think we should pull up the USD, US dollar. I mean, given the sanctions, there's a lot of concern now and worry, like how will this, come back and haunt the USD down the line? Will it?
Yeah, so I mean the chart of what we can do here is go to the larger time frame on the dollar here. And again,
Okay.
one thing that I see here, at least in the charts, and this is always the question mark, right? We've seen this great move up in the dollar recently because of the fears. Anytime you have fear about war or geopolitical issues, people run to the dollar for safety. So near term, I think that continues. However, I will say that eventually the dollar will not be that safe haven. I think the digital yuan will eventually be the reserve currency of the world. We're still talking 5-10 years out from now, but you already see talk about Saudi Arabia buying or China buying in digital yuan and Saudi Arabia being okay with that, different things like that. So the markings are out there that the dollar years from now will run into some major issues, but short term the dollar is still king at this point.
All right, Gareth Soloway. We love having you on. Come back anytime.
I love being on. Thank you so
Especially on
much for
days like today.
having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gareth. And thank you all for watching. We'll have much more for you coming your way, so be sure to stay tuned to Stansberry Research. And don't forget, you can get premier content at danielacambone.com. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.